Welcome to NTD News. I'm Kevin Hogan. Here are today's top stories. Texans are hanging in there as hundreds of thousands are still without power or water. When will service be restored? Former President Trump makes his first media appearances since leaving office. He shares his opinions of President Biden's performance and talks about his next moves. Facebook CEO made a statement that it seems his own platform would class as misinformation as Facebook cracks down on posts and users who speak their mind about the CCP virus. Large numbers of military service members are turning down the CCP virus vaccine. The Pentagon says it is not hiding data from the media. And Canada is expected to pass a bill allowing cities to ban handguns. It's part of a sweeping gun reform package expected to have a huge impact on gun rights. Power outages linger for millions of Americans across the country. It's improved a little in Texas, but outages lasting more than 24 hours are forcing people to find their own ways to stay warm. Here's how some are coping.
Another frigid day in Texas, hundreds of thousands still without power trying to stay warm. You see lines for propane in Houston and lines for food in Austin, even though shelves are empty. But Texas isn't without stories of kindness. Jim Mattress Mac McInvale turned two of his furniture stores in Houston into warming centers. This family came after their trailer lost power.
In the trailer, there's no installation or anything like that, so it's cold over there. Just trying to get them safe, to be honest.
We can't afford to have them freezing, not being able to feed them. So it's a good thing that Mac does this because, like she said, we would be at home freezing right now.
Mattress Mac says over 300 people slept in his North Houston location Tuesday night, and he expects more to keep coming.
And, lots of people coming in as a shelter from the storm. They're at home. They have no power, no lights, no electricity, so it's a disaster as cold as it is. So we're letting people in as a shelter from the storm. That's what we do. We all have a responsibility for the well-being of the community, and we think this is our responsibility.
Governor Greg Abbott says every source of power in the state has been compromised due to systems freezing up or equipment failure, but he says it could have been worse.
What I made clear was the fact that if we relied solely upon green energy, that would be a challenge. But in Texas, we do not rely solely upon green energy. We have access to all sources of energy.
But the American Clean Power Association says it's an extreme weather problem, not a clean power problem. Texas is the only state with its own power grid independent of Washington, D.C. The nonprofit Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT, manages the grid. Governor Abbott is calling to investigate the group. ERCOT said it hoped customers would have partial service by later Wednesday or Thursday.
Texas power outages have forced one food blogger from San Antonio to move her ingredients outside, making use of the area's frosty weather to keep food cold.
Cooking by headlamp. This has actually been slow cooking in the Dutch oven all day because, well, we haven't had power to run the slow cooker. So I'm going to shred this and, I don't know, probably add barbecue sauce. I'll have some shredded barbecue or something like that. Sorry about the shadow. It's because I have a headlamp on so I can see what I'm doing when I cook.
Blogger Erin Chase also cooked up her usual food creations a little differently this week. Instead of flipping on the light switch, she cooked by the light of a headlamp thanks to intermittent power outages. Chase told Reuters that her electricity had gone out off and on for around 3 days. Power outages in Texas dropped below 1 million on Thursday morning for the first time in 4 days, but many people remained without electricity or safe drinking water after winter storms wreaked havoc on the state's power grid and utilities. Former President Trump breaks his media silence Wednesday. He comments on his future plans and has some choice words for his successor. Trump tells Newsmax that President Biden was either mentally gone or lying about not having a vaccine when he came into office. Biden made the unusual comment at a town hall earlier in the week. The president got the vaccine himself before taking office. Trump covers a range of topics in his interview with host Greg Kelly. He criticizes Biden's policies on China, Iran, and the U.S. southern border. He also shares some of his future plans. In the interview, Trump praises his late friend Rush Limbaugh. Kelly wonders if Trump could take over Limbaugh's radio show. Trump says he doesn't want to follow Rush, calling him unique. Trump says he won't go back on Twitter, saying it has become boring. He says he's negotiating with people about coming back to social media, and he can get the word out when he wants to. Kelly presses Trump about whether he will run for president again. Trump replies that he has seen polls and he knows he has tremendous support. He calls his poll numbers through the roof, but says it is too early to decide if he will run in 2024. A new poll reveals that more Republicans now consider former President Trump the best president in U.S. history. Trump beats out Ronald Reagan, Abraham Lincoln, and George Washington to lead the poll. Trump more than triples his results since 2018. The New Economist YouGov survey shows Trump moving from 10 to 36% among Republicans, calling him the best president ever. Reagan now drops to second, going from 36 to 18%. Lincoln and Washington finished third and fourth. In a recent interview, Trump says, "I'm the only guy who gets impeached and my numbers go up." The poll is the latest data point suggesting Trump remains enormously popular among Republicans. One of Trump's impeachment lawyers is blocked by a law school and a civil rights law group. The attorney says these were two important parts of his life, and he lost them for doing what he thinks is right. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the story.
Attorney David Schoen targeted by cancel culture after defending Trump before the Senate. Schoen was planning to teach a civil rights course at a law school this fall, but the law school says he couldn't do it because of his role in the impeachment trial.
They said, they appreciated my writing, and frankly, it would make some students and faculty uncomfortable, so I couldn't do it.
He says it was sad for him because he enjoys teaching. The attorney was also removed from a civil rights lawyer email discussion list.
They actually spent 48 hours discussing this with their board and so on, and they decided that they needed to suspend me from the list. So I've been suspended from that list, but it's a very important one to me. It's very prominent civil rights lawyers and fine people.
He didn't want to reveal which law school or the name of the civil rights group that have canceled him. Schoen says the trial never should have happened and sticks to his argument that the Democrats' evidence lacked merit. And Schoen says Trump has expressed his gratitude for his defense.
Very, very, very gracious to me at all times, I have to say. In every conversation. I spoke to him 2 or 3 times a day during the trial. It's very supportive.
2 of Trump's 3 defense lawyers have faced public pressure since the trial. Attorney Michael Vanderveen's home was vandalized, and he says he's gotten over 100 death threats. He reportedly told Newsmax that now he's moved his children to a secretive location and hired armed guards to protect them. But he says they're doing fine. Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
A Democrat congresswoman calls for the removal of fencing surrounding the U.S. Capitol. She argues authorities can protect the area with more modern solutions. D.C.'s own Eleanor Holmes Norton introduced a new act last week. If adopted, it would ban the installation of permanent fencing on U.S. Capitol grounds. The move responds to the Capitol Police Chief's call for a permanent perimeter fence. Norton told NTD's sister media, The Epoch Times, that the bill also aims to, quote, make sure the nation's capital does not look like an authoritarian regime. Norton's effort joined similar calls from more than 40 Republicans. Earlier this month, they asked House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to call for the removal of the barbed wire fence and for sending National Guard troops home. Apparently, a statement that Facebook's CEO made wouldn't have been allowed on his own platform. That's based on leaked footage that shows Mark Zuckerberg raising concerns about virus vaccines changing people's DNA, even though his company doesn't allow content that makes this claim, calling it misinformation.
We have a new Project Veritas drop to show you. It reveals leaked footage of Mark Zuckerberg commenting on the CCP virus vaccines in July. He questions the vaccine safety while assuming they change the recipient's DNA.
But I do just want to make sure that I share some caution on this because we just don't know the long-term side effects of basically modifying people's DNA and RNA to directly encode in a person's DNA and RNA, basically the ability to produce those antibodies, and whether that causes other mutations or other risks downstream.
But it seems Zuckerberg's very comment would be censored on his own platform if he were to post that statement today. That's because last week the company issued a new policy on the content related to COVID-19 vaccines. It states the goal of this policy is to combat misinformation about vaccinations and diseases, which, if believed, could result in reduced vaccinations and harm public health and safety. Facebook says its policy is meant to allow people to discuss, debate, and share their personal experiences and opinions. But the tech giant banned claims that say COVID-19 vaccines change people's DNA. That's, of course, after Zuckerberg himself raised those concerns. But then in November, he appears to change his stance as he interviews leading government scientist Dr. Fauci.
And just to clear up one point, I mean, my understanding is that these vaccines do not modify your DNA or RNA. So I think that's just an important point to clarify. If I'm getting anything wrong here, of course, correct me. But
No.
but just to make that clear.
No. First of all, DNA is inherent in your own nucleus cell. Sticking in anything foreign will ultimately get cleared.
Good. Well, I'm glad we can clear that up.
Facebook didn't respond right away to a request for comment.
A former news anchor from Detroit is found dead in her home just one day after she received the CCP virus vaccine. 68-year-old Karen Hudson Samuels also worked as a producer and news director at broadcaster WGPR-TV in Michigan. It's not yet clear what caused her death. Her husband, Cliff Samuels, told CBS Detroit they suspect it may have been a stroke, but adds the normal vaccine side effects may have masked those symptoms. He said he hopes the autopsy report will shed light on what happened. The Pentagon says about 1/3 of U.S. military troops have turned down the vaccine for the CCP virus. The Pentagon emphasizes it's not hiding vaccine refusal data from the public.
The Pentagon says about 1/3 of U.S. military troops have turned down the vaccine for the CCP virus. Major General Jeff Taliaferro of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said the acceptance rate varies by group.
We don't precisely know why an individual has not received a vaccine. We think it's important that the department continue to communicate to our service members the value of the vaccine, the safety of the vaccine.
The head of the National Guard Bureau told the panel the acceptance rate for guardsmen hovers around 2/3 to 70%. That's not far off from the number for the military as a whole. The acting defense secretary for Homeland Defense and Global Security told the panel 359,000 service members have received 1 dose, while 147,000 are fully vaccinated with 2 doses. Congressman Mike Rogers told the panel that he doesn't believe the military should wait the 2 years until the vaccine is fully approved before service members and all of the Department of Defense's workforce gets vaccinated.
It's under an emergency use authorization right now. It doesn't achieved final FDA approval, and so there's a real limit legally that we have to make it mandatory for our troops and their families. That's why it's a voluntary basis right now.
Kirby also tried to assure reporters that the Pentagon is not withholding vaccination data.
Homeland Security is finding millions of fake masks. They say the masks pose a threat to frontline workers. Officials say they provide no protection at all.
That includes a seizure earlier today with Special Agents of Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI as it is commonly known, of seizing more than 1 million counterfeit masks as part of an ongoing investigation into a criminal enterprise distributing counterfeit masks throughout the United States.
A CBS report says early investigations reveal China is the source of the fakes. They're made to look like authentic 3M products, but the phony masks are not tested for N95 compliance and could put frontline medical workers at risk. We're sold to hospital medical facilities and government agencies in at least 5 states. Investigators notified about 6,000 potential victims who could have purchased the knockoffs. Officials encourage medical workers and companies to go to 3M's website for tips on how to spot fakes. After Minneapolis residents complained about lacking a police force, the city is apparently refunding their officers. NTD's Christina Kim revisits the idea of cutting down police forces with a criminal justice expert.
After demands from Minneapolis residents, their city council unanimously voted to spend nearly $6.5 million to hire more police officers. Minneapolis residents complained that they were waiting longer to get a response to emergency calls, and violent crime has surged. This is a sharp reversal from just last December, when the Minneapolis Council decided to take $8 million away from the police department after George Floyd's death occurred in the city, sparking unrest and calls to cut police budgets. Heather McDonald, who has written extensively on criminal justice and policing, says this development is perfectly predictable.
The left embraced its conventional narrative that the problem in Black communities is the police rather than criminals. The police backed off, and we saw what happened.
She says though the city leaders didn't admit they got it wrong, this move at least implicitly acknowledges the truth.
If you cannot solve crime by reknitting the family, The second best solution to crime is constitutional but assertive, proactive policing.
McDonald says the core root of crime starts at home.
The left will always say poverty or racism or inadequate government funding. I am absolutely convinced that the root cause is the breakdown of the two-parent married family that is at its most catastrophic level in the Black community.
Some studies have shown that growing up in a two-parent household impacts poverty and crime. 3 Minneapolis City Council members proposed replacing the police department with the public safety department that would include law enforcement and other services. Those in support say the police system doesn't work and they need alternative forms like social programs to address the crime rate.
Social services, the government is incapable of acting as a substitute parent, whether it's through a welfare check or through a social worker.
McDonald says it's unclear if more cities will reverse course like Minneapolis because there are many leaders on the left who support defunding the police. But she says we have to push back against the, quote, Black Lives Matter narrative about racist policing. Christina Kim, NTD News.
The ACLU and a host of over 40 groups write to President Biden asking him to block the federal government's use of facial recognition technology. The groups claim the technology threatens privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. The letter says facial recognition technology threatens Americans' core freedoms. It states that the government can use the technology to track everyone who goes to a place of worship or attends a political rally. Some cities and states have placed limits on the technology. The FBI and federal agencies don't currently have restrictions. The coalition claims that errors by facial recognition systems have led to wrongful arrests. The groups ask Biden to take executive action to protect civil liberties. President Biden comes under fire for his latest remarks on China. We speak with a China expert to break down why it's so controversial. NTD's Juliette Song has the story.
In a CNN town hall this Tuesday, President Biden says the U.S. must speak up about human rights abuses in China, but also adds there are different cultural norms countries follow.
I point out to him, no American president can be sustained as a president if he doesn't reflect the values of the United States. And so the idea I'm not going to speak out against what he's doing in Hong Kong, what he's doing with the Uyghurs in western mountains of China, and Taiwan trying to end the one China policy by making it forceful. I said, and by the he said he gets it. Culturally, there are different norms that each country and their leaders are expected to follow.
This comes after the host asked him whether he talked about the Chinese Communist Party or CCP's human rights abuses against Uyghurs with CCP leader Xi Jinping. The U.S. designated the CCP's abuses against the Uyghur Muslim population a genocide. The CCP's abuses include mass detention and forced sterilization. A China affairs expert says President Biden's remarks on different cultural norms echoes Beijing's propaganda. He says the CCP has always been glorifying its human rights abuses.
But in fact, just like the idiom "a wolf in sheep's clothing," the Chinese Communist Party has always been the wolf.
Take the mass detention of Uyghurs, for example. While many in the West call them concentration camps, the CCP calls them education training centers. Party propaganda says the centers help Uyghurs get rid of extremist and terrorist thoughts. But camp survivors describe forced labor and systematic sexual abuses against women in the camps. They say officials there forced them to sing songs that praise the CCP and criticize their Muslim belief. Human rights activists say the Chinese regime has been trying to wipe out the Uyghur culture. Measures include forcing Uyghur Muslims to eat pork and drink alcohol and forcing sterilization on Uyghur women in order to limit the size of the ethnic population. Juliette Song, NTD News.
We've been hearing a lot about President Biden's plan to reform gun laws, but it's not just the United States that's expecting these reforms. Our northern neighbor is also going to see more restrictions on gun ownership. NTD's Allison Lee reports.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Parliament is expected to pass sweeping gun reform legislation soon. One of the reforms will allow municipalities to ban handguns. The proposed Bill C-21 would give municipalities the option to pass bylaws that prohibit the storage and transportation of handguns within city boundaries. A breach of these bylaws will lead to a maximum of 2 years in prison and a possible revocation of gun permits. The Prime Minister also announced there will be a buyback program in the upcoming months. Another reform proposal would create red flag and yellow flag laws that make it easier for friends or families to petition courts to immediately remove firearms from a gun owner. Penalties for firearms smuggling will also be increased from 10 to 14 years in prison. These reform measures are believed to be an add-on to the gun ban last year. Trudeau banned 1,500 models of mostly semi-automatic rifles last May by bypassing Parliament. He cited a mass shooting in April as the reason. Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
And just ahead, a Cuban American rejects a call from Seattle council members to support communist Cuba. He says promoting Cuban communism is a way to kill society. More on that in just a minute.
Why are millions of Americans moving their money into gold and silver? It's simple. The world has never been more unpredictable. The biggest economic crisis we've faced since 2008, and a government that's about to print trillions and trillions of dollars. That's why so many Americans are turning to gold and silver to protect their nest egg. American Hartford Gold is a trusted name to help families to safeguard their wealth. With an A+ rating from the BBB and 5-star ratings on the biggest review websites like Trustpilot and Google, American Hartford Gold can help you convert any qualifying IRA or 401k into precious metals. Or they'll help you to easily purchase physical gold and silver and deliver straight to your doorstep. Learn how you can protect your wealth with gold and silver today. Get this free 2021 information guide. Call 866-893-1493 or text TV to 65532.
The United States might be a step closer to giving reparations to Black Americans to address the impact of slavery. NTD's Christina Kim looks at the voices for and against this proposal.
Reparations has always been a controversial topic, and in the current political climate, we may be closer than ever to giving out reparations to Black Americans. The Biden administration supports the idea. The president said he'd support a task force to study reparations, and the vice president has floated the idea during her time in the Senate. A panel discussion from the House Judiciary had speakers arguing for and against the proposal. Some said reparations are a necessary step to reconciliation.
America must engage in full reparations. There's no rational reason why the highest standard of redress should not be applied to a people harmed by its own government in so many ways and for so many years.
Reparations can play a role in addressing health disparities because they are about undoing structures of injustice, including structures of racial injustice that produce health disparities.
The U.S. has never fully or properly reckoned with the gross human rights violation of chattel slavery and the post-emancipation racist policies that continue to impact Black people in the U.S. today.
Others say it's unclear who would pay for reparations and who would receive it.
Reparation teach separation. Where would the money come from? Does it come for all the other races except the Black taxpayers? Who is Black? What percentage of Black must you be to receive reparation?
And my dad always told my brothers and me the following: hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. You cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you complain about what other people did to you, go to the nearest mirror and say to yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome?
Political scientist and former Princeton professor Carol Swain says the current racial tension is a communist tactic to keep people divided.
It's just Marxism being played out at a level that most Americans, I don't think, thought was possible. And they believe this happened quickly. This did not happen quickly.
And according to her, reparations will continue the divide.
And even if they were to pass slave reparations, the people that benefit from keeping us divided, that use race as a weapon, they'll never give it up.
She says the rhetoric behind the push for reparations and other governmental programs harms the Black community.
If you believe, as the political left says, that everything is stacked against you, it doesn't matter what you do, you're discriminated, you're going to be discriminated against because of the color of your skin, then why get out of bed?
If she had believed those, quote, destructive messages, Swain said she wouldn't have had the opportunities she's had. She would not have continued her education and, quote, would be in the rural South, married in poverty. Swain encourages people both inside America and abroad to be bold and press back against the division.
They can't cancel all of us. They can't do it. And again, truth cannot be stamped out. They cannot stamp out truth.
She says she's hopeful that by working together, things can turn around. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Council members in a major West Coast city have voiced support of communist-ruled Cuba. However, a self-made Cuban immigrant living nearby tells a very different story. Echo Liu in Seattle has more.
Julio Ortiz is the owner of the Twisted Cuban Cafe and Bar in the city of Woodinville. He is an author, a collector, and an entrepreneur. Now at 46 years old, he spent just over half his life under the Cuban communist regime's rigid control.
It obligated me to leave Cuba, to leave the country, to leave my culture, my mom, my dad, my family, and all the idea and expectations and future that I had planned out. What future? There's no future in Cuba, and that's the reason why I left.
Ortiz left behind his life in Cuba to pursue his dream in America when he was 24. He was studying to become a doctor, but the communist government decided they didn't need any more and prohibited him from his studies.
They don't care about your rights. They don't care about your freedom of speech. They don't care about absolutely nothing. And that's the reason why I got out. They select who they want to go to school or not.
Now he owns several businesses in Washington state. He also wrote his own book, Escape from Cuba, to tell both his children and the world his story under a communist regime.
Well, my comment on Cuban communism is I compare it to COVID-19. Very simple. So I'll prefer to deal with the COVID-19 virus, even though it's killing a lot of people, but it's killing them fast. The communism kills people slowly. They kill your ideas. They kill your mentality. They kill your rights.
Ortiz knows what communism would mean for the United States.
Well, I think promoting Cuban communism in this country, not just Seattle, just in this country in general, it is just a way to kill our society.
Ortiz's comments come at the same time that 2 Seattle council members have voiced their support for Cuban communism. Councilwoman Teresa Mosqueda recently retweeted a post promoting communist Cuba. In January, she and Councilwoman Shama Sawant passed a resolution calling for collaboration with Cuba from the Biden administration.
It destroyed my family. It destroyed all my opportunities in education and physically, mentally, psychologically. It destroyed everything, as it still destroys a lot of people in Cuba right now.
Despite the damage inflicted on his family and life, Ortiz lives by a simple motto.
In the back, it says, "I've never had a bad day in my life."
He said he hasn't been back to Cuba since publishing his book and knows trouble may await him back home.
It has to be done. It's my life, and I'll prefer to die instead of hiding it.
Reporting by Echo Liu, NTD News, Washington.
The Star-Spangled Banner waves proudly over a California highway. A protest group and its counter-protesters encounter complaints after gathering on an overpass each week. We hear more from NTD's David Lamb.
If location is everything, you couldn't ask for a better spot. This overpass, visible from 1 mile away, hangs 50 feet over Highway 24. Lisa Disbrow and her group have been rallying here for nearly 20 years. They're known as the Lafayette Flag Brigade. The group promotes free speech and more recently, Stop the Steal protest here on Mondays and Fridays.
And if you don't like somebody's ideas, that's okay. But you don't get to go and dox them. I've been doxed. You don't get to swarm their car and make accusations that they're drinking. That's wrong. That has to stop.
Disbrow says the overpass has a significant history. On September 11, 2001, a man held up a flag on the bridge, and by that evening, the bridge was flooded with people holding flags. She says it's become a gathering place for difficult times. But in the past few months, she says counter-protesters show up, and they're intimidating and violent.
So yeah, we do have a lot of counter-protesters. There are some regulars. A lot of them know my name because I've been coming here.
Recently, the city has received letters and emails from residents demanding the bridge be covered by shadow cloth or a ban on free speech activities on the bridge, claiming the protesters' activities are too loud and distracting for motorists who could get into accidents.
Make sure it's safe, because we're safe out here.
We're peaceful and we're safe. We're out here for everything, for the love of America, our right to come out here, because this is public property.
The city council says the state's transportation department's policy is to ban all expressive signs, banners, and flags on highway overpasses, except directional signs. But because the state owns the bridge, people are allowed to carry flags on the sidewalk. There's still debate about whether affixing the flags to the fencing is appropriate.
What they're doing is actually really dangerous. There's been a lot of pressure from the local neighborhoods here in Lafayette to get them out of here.
He was one of the counter-protesters that day.
I went and talked to that guy. He seems pretty nice, and I like how he's respectfully exercising his First Amendment right, because he has just the same right to be here as we do.
The city council has to respond to the city people. It's not that we're leaving a mess behind us. It's that they don't like what we're saying. And that's called an impingement of free speech.
It's about 5:30 in the evening and it's cold and windy. The protesters are still here, maybe here for another hour. They've been here for 2 hours. They told us that they're here for their First Amendment rights. It doesn't look like they're about to give up. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
Up next, a Chinese company claims 10% of New York City's electricity runs through their equipment. An expert breaks down the potential risk. And a number of Chinese human rights activists have been detained, sentenced to prison, or even sent to mental hospitals, all because they spoke out against the Chinese Communist Party. Stay tuned to find out more.
Someone has to find the way to build the Great Dome. Completely new, completely original.
마루 유치원 폐쇄 명령서입니다.
전 폐쇄 명령 받아들일 수 없습니다.
유치원 폐쇄 명령이라.
좀 들어간 건 어떻게 됐어? 도저히 방법이 없대?
정일도 사장님을 대신해서 제가 대신 말씀드리면 안 되겠습니까?
A Chinese company claims their equipment processes 10% of New York City's electricity. An expert tells NTD about some alarming consequences that could happen if the equipment is tampered with. But the risk doesn't stop there. NTD's Juliet Song has the latest.
Potential risks posed by Chinese equipment are back in the spotlight. That's as a Chinese company claims its gear supports 10% of New York City's electricity. A security expert with decades of experience in the energy industry is ringing the alarm. He says if the Chinese equipment is compromised, the city could see a partial blackout. Not only that.
You're talking about not only 10% directly of the power coming into New York, but that's going to affect the other 90% because they're going to have to, in a sense, make up for that 10%. And they may not be capable of doing that.
The equipment in question is called a power transformer. Despite the name, they're not alien technology found in sci-fi films, but critical devices in America's national power grid. Without them, the electricity we need couldn't be delivered to homes and businesses. Chinese company JSHP sold a power transformer to a power plant in New Jersey. That plant powers at least 500,000 homes in New York City. The company made headlines last year. That's after federal officials seized one of its power transformers. Authorities later sent the equipment to a lab that investigates national security threats. Weiss alleges before this incident, a U.S. utility company bought a Chinese-made transformer and found something unexpected.
They found extra electronics in it that should not have been there.
It's unclear how the device affects the transformer.
The concern here is that where that equipment was installed, there is no data to steal. The only thing it would be there for is really either to damage the transformer or to affect the operation of the electric grid. That is a very, very big problem.
And the concerns don't stop there. Wise says if a power transformer breaks down, it can take a long time to get a new one in place.
So this isn't like if something breaks, you go to Home Depot and get another. If there's a problem here, you're talking potentially a year without this.
At least 200 Chinese power transformers are sitting in the U.S. power grid system right now. Wise says the government should tighten regulations and check for hardware backdoors in the Chinese gear. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News.
Now we look to the stories of several Chinese human rights activists. They're currently in jail after standing up for freedom and opposing the regime. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has the story.
For Chinese people, Lunar New Year is a holiday about family reunion. But many people in communist China were unable to celebrate with families this year. Many of them are human rights activists imprisoned for their activities. At least 4 Chinese women were sentenced to prison or sent to psychiatric hospitals by the CCP in the past year. Li Yanli was sentenced to 4 years in prison in April 2020 for posting online in support of democracy and freedom. Jiang Zhan was sentenced to 4 years in prison in December 2020 for reporting on the CCP virus pandemic in Wuhan. Gen Xiaonan got 3 years in prison for speaking out for dissidents. Dong Yaoqiong was sent to a psychiatric hospital for the 3rd time last year. She splashed ink on a poster of CCP head Xi Jinping in public. Artist Zhang Dongning has been detained since 2019. Her comic series satirized some bad behavior among Chinese people, including those of young Chinese internet users who are easily outraged by negative portrayal of the regime. The latest woman to be detained is Li Qiaochu. Earlier this month, she was taken away by police for so-called subversion of state power. She spoke out publicly for her boyfriend, a human rights lawyer who was sentenced to prison.
And just ahead, the Chinese regime says it's reducing rare earth mineral exports to the U.S. The resources are essential to making everything from smartphones to fighter jets. That and more after the break.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format, where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
Airbus says jet deliveries will be flat in 2021 and has scrapped its dividend for a second year. Meanwhile, losses are set to deepen at key customer Air France-KLM, and the future of both firms hangs on a recovery in travel demand. Here's our latest financial and business news on jobs and the economy.
Airbus says 2020 was the jet industry's most challenging crisis. On Thursday, the world's biggest maker of airliners posted an operating loss for the year of €510 million, or about $614 million. The global travel slump sparked a big restructuring at the firm, saddling it with hefty charges. There were costs too in shutting down its loss-making line of A380 Super Jumbos. Now the firm is wary about 2021, predicting no upturn in jet deliveries. It's also scrapped its dividend for a second year and slashed the value of planes it has on order, though it does expect adjusted operating profits to rise. But Thursday also saw fresh signs of just how tough life is for Airbus customers. Air France KLM says it will plunge to yet deeper losses before seeing a recovery. That as it posted an $8.5 billion net loss for 2020 and put back a key profitability goal. The group last year shed about 10% of its workforce and says another 6,000 jobs will go in the coming years. Now its future, and Airbus's too, hangs on a recovery in travel demand.
Daimler says it's expecting gains in sales and profits this year and reckons it can quickly make up for a shortage of chips that is hampering production.
Mercedes maker Daimler sees a better year ahead. It said Thursday that it was expecting big gains in sales and operating profit. The company also says that by the end of the year it will make up for a production shortfall caused by a shortage of chips, though the silicon drought will crimp sales in the first quarter. The bullish outlook comes after Daimler confirmed full-year pre-tax earnings of almost $8 billion. Daimler's chief executive called the recovery there remarkable. Mercedes sales in the country jumped 22% in the fourth quarter. Like rivals, Daimler is also racing to bring more electric vehicles to market. In 2020, its sales of electrified cars almost quadrupled on the year before. Thursday's news sent shares in the firm as much as 2.5% higher in early trading.
Nestle wants to boost organic sales growth towards a mid-single-digit rate this year, the food giant said on Thursday, after strong demand for pet food and health products in the Americas helped its growth outshine peers last year.
Consumers kept buying packaged food through lockdowns, helping food giant Nestle outshine its rivals last year. The company shed underperforming businesses and invested in growth areas such as plant-based food. It also saw strong demand for pet food and health products in the Americas. On Thursday, Nestle said it wanted to boost organic sales growth towards a mid-single-digit rate this year. Full-year organic sales, which strip out currency effects and acquisitions, grew 3.6% in 2020. That was ahead of Nestlé's own guidance. It also topped rival Unilever's 1.9% underlying sales growth. France's Danone is due to post its 2020 results on Friday, with analysts expecting negative like-for-like growth. Net profit at Nestlé fell 3% to $13.5 billion, also beating expectations. The year-ago period had benefited from a one-off gain linked to the sale of its skin health business. Shares in Nestlé, though, fell over 0.5% in early trade.
If you haven't gotten your $600 stimulus check from December, it's now on its way. The Internal Revenue Service says all of the nearly 150 million checks have been sent out. The IRS was required to issue the $600 payments by mid-January, so it could move on to processing this year's tax returns. Eligible people who have moved or changed bank accounts may not have received the money yet, but they can claim it on their 2020 tax return. In total, about $142 billion was sent out to help Americans. Congress is considering a third round of payments. Lawmakers hope to get that legislation passed by mid-March. A few North Koreans are now the world's leading bank robbers, but they're not stealing stacks of cash, they're stealing wallets full of cryptocurrency. The DOJ is charging 3 programmers for trying to steal more than $1.3 billion. Here are the details. Right now, you're looking at 27-year-old Kim Il, one of the people allegedly conspiring to commit some of the most detrimental cyber attacks in history. He, along with John Chang-hyuk, are allegedly members of a North Korean intel agency engaged in criminal hacking. Hyuk speaks English, Korean, and Mandarin Chinese. The charging documents claim other countries like China and Russia allowed these hackers to operate within their borders to do the North Korean regime's bidding. Here's 36-year-old Park Jin-hyuk, who the FBI wants for conspiracy to commit bank fraud and computer intrusion. All these hackers are wanted for allegedly stealing over $1.3 billion in money and cryptocurrency from financial institutions and companies. But that's not all. Here's the Assistant Attorney General for National Security, John Demers, on how the North Korean regime has become adept at stealing money from institutions around the world.
It also describes in stark detail how the DPRK cyber threat has followed the money and turned its revenue generation sites on the most cutting-edge aspects of international finance, including through the theft of cryptocurrency from exchanges and other financial institutions. In some cases, through the creation and deployment of cryptocurrency applications with hidden backdoors.
The indictment alleges the hackers engaged in a host of cyber attacks for revenge or financial gain against the following entities.
You want us to kill the leader of North Korea?
Yes. For one, they came after Sony Entertainment in 2014 for the movie The Interview that depicted a fictional assassination of North Korea's leader. And they also used an email phishing campaign between 2016 and 2020 that targeted employees of U.S. defense contractors, energy, aerospace, and technology companies. Kevin Hogan, NTD News. As ties between the U.S. and China deteriorate, the trade war is turning into a technology war. Beijing's latest move suggests national defense might be the next front. NTD's Becky Zhou has the latest.
China is trying to reduce exports of rare earth minerals to the U.S. The material is crucial to creating equipment used by the U.S. military. Rare earth minerals refer to 17 chemical elements used in everything from smartphones to military equipment and even fighter jets. The Financial Times says China controls about 80% of the global supply of rare earth minerals. A recent Congress report says each F-35 fighter jet requires over 900 pounds of rare earth minerals. The U.S. is now restarting companies that mine and process rare earth metals to help reduce American dependency on China. A national defense expert advises the government to bring supply chains back to the U.S.
What the United States needs to do is cut the flow of capital to China, redirect those flows of capital into the United States to rebuild infrastructure, rebuild our manufacturing base.
President Biden says he plans to invest in America's infrastructure over the coming year. Becky Zhou, NTD News.
And still to come, there's almost nothing more French than the baguette. Now, the edible icon competes for UNESCO World Heritage status, something that could give the country's bakers a boost. And an animal therapy center in Illinois connects with people virtually. The ranch is home to miniature horses, donkeys, and dogs who are helping people cope with the pandemic. More on that in just a minute.
If you're like me, and I think it's actually most of us, then you're getting really fed up with the nonsense going on inside the banking system. I mean, we've worked hard our entire lives to retire comfortably. We just recovered from the crash of 2008, and it seems like it's about to happen all over again. Look at the too-big-to-fail banks. They're only getting bigger as the Fed hands them trillions of dollars daily, while simple folks like you and me, we're only getting the short end of the stick. That's why I'm glad I found this book called The Bank Failure Survival Guide. Give us a call, and we'll send you a free copy with no obligations whatsoever. Just one American to another, telling you about some options that you might not have considered. Call 866-239-2619 today for your free copy of the Bank Failure Survival Guide. That's 866-239-2619.
The French baguette is admired at home and around the world. Now, the bakery treat is competing for UNESCO World Heritage status.
There's almost nothing more French than the baguette. Now, the crisp golden loaves are gunning for the UN Culture Agency's intangible World Heritage status. The Confederation of French Bakers has submitted its application to France's Ministry of Culture. The department will choose the country's final candidate for the UNESCO title in late March.
There's not one single secret to making a good traditional baguette. It's several secrets of production. First, it requires a lot of time, a savoir-faire, the right way of baking, good flour with additives. We mix good products and we achieve to have a finished product that's of high quality.
A French government decree released in 1993 regulates the production of traditional baguettes. They should be made by hand and contain the main ingredients: wheat flour, water, salt, and yeast, without any additives. The decree also requires a fermentation length of between 15 to 20 hours and a temperature between 39 to 43 degrees. The dough used should be fresh and not frozen. The UNESCO recognition would be a boost for France's 33,000 bakers as they work to make it through the pandemic.
We speak a lot about restaurateurs, but bakers have also suffered a big decrease in activity. So this title could comfort bakers and encourage a coming new generation that we need.
The practice of buying baguettes daily is ingrained in French culture. According to the head of the French Bakers Confederation, around 6 million are sold every day in France. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
A landscape painting by Sir Winston Churchill is up for auction next month. It's expected to sell for up to $3.5 million. What makes this piece particularly special? It was gifted to President Franklin D. Roosevelt by the British Prime Minister during World War II.
Churchill painted Tower of the Koutoubia Mosque in Marrakesh following the January 1943 Casablanca conference, which both leaders attended. Churchill then took Roosevelt to Marrakesh to see the sunset over the Atlas Mountains. The work is to be sold from Hollywood actor Angelina Jolie's Jolie Family Collection, with an estimated price tag of roughly $2 million to $3.5 million.
Is that Churchill painted nothing in the Second World War except this one painting. And the Casablanca conference was an important conference where Britain and America came together to decide on how they would accept the outcome of the war. And the significance of this painting is the fact that Churchill painted it for Roosevelt after they visited together following the conference and then gave it to him as a present. And so it signifies not just their friendship but also the special relationship between Britain and America. The other factor is that Churchill considered his North African views to be a cut above all his other paintings.
Churchill, who took up painting in his 40s, first visited Morocco in 1935 and painted around 45 pictures of the country, according to Christie's.
In comparison to his other works, the record for a work of his, a painting of his at auction is £1.8 million. And the likely interested buyers will probably come from the UK and the United States, as you might expect, because of Churchill and Roosevelt. But there's a much greater global interest, particularly in Churchill. And so we could see Middle Eastern interest, obviously because of the subject matter as well as interest from the Far East. So truly global interest.
The painting is leading Christie's Modern British Art Evening Sale on March 1st, where other works on offer include a portrait of socialite Doris Delevingne by John Lavery.
Some animals in an Israeli zoo are missing their human visitors. That's as the country contends with another pandemic lockdown.
These animals were a popular source of entertainment at Jerusalem's Biblical Zoo, but they haven't had any guests in weeks. Their human visitors haven't been around for a month since the start of a national pandemic lockdown in Israel. Zookeepers say the animals miss staring at them.
We are here with the chimpanzees, the great apes, and we see that the last months they are really seeking for interaction. They are sitting above, they are playing with each other. We are trying to do enrichments, but they are missing the visitors.
A sprawling site in Jerusalem, the zoo contains a wide variety of animals, but its species mentioned in the Bible are the most prominent. With no visitors around, the animals must make do with interacting with their keepers. They're busy feeding and tending to the kangaroos, zebras, elephants, and other animals. When a Reuters television crew toured the zoo, black and gold howler monkeys got excited.
For example, you came here, the zoo is closed, but you are a group, and we see that they are back to the upper area of the exhibit. They move out from the house, and they come back to interact with the visitors. I'm happy to see it.
But the lions were not as thrilled. They got closer to their keepers and the front areas of their compound now that the crowds are gone.
An animal therapy center in Illinois finds new ways to connect with the public. Video calls and social media have helped keep its programs running after the pandemic halted in-person visits.
Soul Harbor Ranch in Barrington is home to 10 miniature horses, 4 miniature donkeys, 2 standard horses, and 3 dogs. Normally, these animals raise spirits with visits to hospitals, hospices, and nursing homes. But in March 2020, the Animal Therapy Center shut down normal activities as the pandemic hit. Soul founder Jody Deagle since found a new way to connect the animals with the public via Zoom and Instagram.
Now, we didn't have fundraisers, so we did everything virtually. As most nonprofits and businesses have had to pivot, we pivoted, and wow, we reached an audience that we had no idea we would be able to reach.
What we do
Seoul Harborers met with schools, libraries, and other organizations in private video online meetings. It also means people from outside Illinois can get in on the animal therapy. Seoul Harbor Ranch is now venturing onto Facebook with a weekly live show called Facebook Live at 5. But Seoul hasn't forgotten the benefits of in-person visits. The group has revamped how they conduct those trips. The animals never step a hoof or paw inside. Instead, the dogs and horses appear at the windows, greeting the residents safely on the other side of the glass. It may seem like a trivial visit, but it's a reprieve from daily monotony.
Animals really help you to do that. You really block everything out. You're there in that moment. When we walk into that hospital and people see our little sneaker-wearing miniature horses or our beautiful therapy dogs, again, there's this just incredible connection.
The benefits of animal therapy are well documented. They can help cancer patients, those suffering from post-traumatic stress, and those with dementia. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And that's all for now. Catch us again tonight at 6:30 Eastern. I'm Kevin Hogan.
Hi there. A quick update. Social media has some new restrictions which might affect your access to our channel. If you want to stay tuned, make sure you visit us directly at ntd.com. We'll also have a newsletter coming out soon and you can sign up for that now. So